It's funny how people think that history is boring, but do we even know what's going on inside these pages? It's still being written and it's packed with wild stories and unexpected twists.
I'm here to tell you the stories behind the history. It's complicated, messy, and quite oftentimes bizarre and strange. You are about to learn that this is not your average history lesson. I'm Christine Darrow, but you can call me
Historic Thompson Park in Watertown, New York. A 450-acre space with tennis courts, hiking trails, playgrounds, a zoo, and an 18-hole golf course. And a vortex?
Wow, hold up. Let's take a trip into the known before we delve into the unknown.
Before construction of, as it was originally called, City Park, Pinnacle Hill was a nearly inaccessible plot of land adjacent to what was referred to as Reservoir Hill, both considered an ideal location for a city park as early as 1891. It was then that Dr. Ernest Adolph Edward Meyer purchased land near Reservoir Hill with plans to build a sanatorium, suggesting the city or someone wealthy purchase Pinnacle Hill and develop it as a public park. And that is just what John C. Thompson did.
John C. Thompson was one of the officers for the New York Air Brake Company around the turn of the century. He wanted to give something to the community, and he picked a park because he felt it was something that could be used by everyone. Whether you're rich, poor, young, or old, you could go up into the park and use it. He particularly had an interest in the impact it had on children. He figured that playing out in a beautiful, natural setting would be good for their character and would help them become good adults, basically. And that was the general feeling about this type of urban park at the time.
But buying the land was only the first step. To make it a park, it needed to be designed.
In 1899, June of that year, he sent a letter to Frederick Law Olmsted asking if he would recommend somebody to design a park of 75 to 100 acres. Frederick Law Olmsted had retired about 6 years prior to that, but his sons, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. and John C. Olmsted, had continued the firm under the name Olmsted Brothers. He found their fees satisfactory and they immediately started working.
With a budget of $75,000, the Olmsteds went to work, turning this large plot of land into the park we all recognize today. By 1917, when the park was donated to the city, 500 acres were designed and maintained. It was a project that few knew John C. Thompson was actually a part of, as he was an anonymous benefactor from buying the land to investing in its maintenance. His anonymity on the project was later revealed after the philanthropist's death in 1924. The city then made the decision to have it renamed in his honor from City Park to Thompson Park. So, 1920s, that's right around the time that the zoo was constructed.
It's hard to say it was constructed because it was sort of just piecemeal together.
Zoo New York is one of Thompson Park's most iconic spots. It began with a donation of 2 whitetail deer in 1920 with a goal to create a natural exhibit offering visitors a chance to enjoy the beauty of various creatures. The zoo has since evolved into the second most visited attraction in the Thousand Islands region, keeping their mission to inspire, conserve, and educate the public. And it's safe to say Dr. Mark Irwin embodies that mission.
It really was the original intent of the zoo to have native species. And what we've found is that you can have animals that are adapted to our climate cared for so much more easily within our small zoo. So not only can we tell the story in a very tight theme and explain how we have native species here, but we can touch on the history of New York State and share that with people by featuring animals that do live here that people don't see, or sometimes ones that are extirpated and no longer living in New York State.
We get the chance to take a walk through the zoo and learn about the variety of creatures the zoo boasts.
Here we are at our wolverine habitat. So we have the only wolverine in New York State and the northeast of the US.
So how did you go about acquiring him?
So our staff have been working with the Species Survival Plan stud bookkeeper that coordinates zoos and the animals that we have in zoos around the country. And specifically with Abisko, he was born in Europe. So part of the European breeding program, he was to come to Minnesota Zoo, and he's had a very successful career in the breeding program. He's ready to retire, and as a solitary animal, solitary species, they needed a place that could give him a really good home, and that's where we came in.
And wolverines are native to New York, correct?
They are extirpated, meaning that they don't live here currently, but in the past they did. They were actually taken out during the fur trade period. They had big, thick, hairy coats that were in demand.
So exactly how is our Wolverine a superhero now? Like, he's any relation to Hugh Jackman whatsoever?
Not related at all, actually.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know Hugh. I imagine there's a lot of similarities there. But it's great to have such a unique species. People sometimes say, hey, why would we want to see animals in our backyard? But you know what? When you look at the natural history of New York State, we've had incredible animals here that some are not here anymore. And Wolverine's a great example of that.
And he looks pretty fuzzy and cuddly, but the looks at those claws, something tells me I probably shouldn't go over there and pet him.
You really should consider the potential danger of species when working with them. He is fantastic to work with. He gets along very well. He's got a lot of personality, so it's great to see him. He enjoys being here at our zoo. He comes up, he watches the people just like we watch him.
Is it safe to pet him?
No, I would not recommend that. They're as adorable looking as they are wild animals, and so we have to treat them as such.
But I can boop him on the nose?
I wouldn't even recommend that, but
okay.
You can
No
boop
booping.
Hugh Jackman on the nose.
Just interacting with Mark helped me to understand the importance of learning about our furry neighbors. And when it's not being taught outside, it's being taught in a classroom setting through Zoo New York's Homeschool Program.
Our homeschool program is a way for parents to help fill the science curriculum that's required by New York State. We do STEM projects, we do crafts, we go and explore the zoo and learn about our animals here at the zoo. The one thing that I love about this program is seeing the kids learn. When they have questions and you can answer them and it's an aha moment, it is on their faces. And you can tell. And you can tell when they're having a good time. And for kids to learn and have a good time, that is so important. It makes me want to keep doing it. I just want to keep going and keep trying to find ways to get that same joy every week. Because if you're doing the same thing every week, they're going to get bored. So it's a challenge to come up with new ways to present information where they're not going to get bored.
But studying zoology and practicing nature conservancy certainly didn't prepare Dr. Irwin for the walk we were about to take. And I can't think of a better place to talk about the zoo than in Watertown's very own paranormal myth.
How long does the trek go for here?
Forever. I've never been to the end. I think people go walking through here and they're like, oh my God, it's been forever. And then they see what time it is and like, oh my God, we were in there for an hour.
I talk about animals, but here we can branch out a little bit more. There's lots of opportunity.
Love it.
Yeah, this is kind of spooky. I bet you could do something over Halloween with this kind of a setting.
And I hope with the Vortex just outside your main gate that you guys do something fun for Halloween.
We do. At the zoo, we have Boo at the Zoo, which is a Halloween celebration.
Fun.
Every October, the last 2 weekends leading up to Halloween, we invite the community to come in with kids in costume. They dress up. It's our biggest event now. My favorite part is watching the costumes and the kids. It's how you keep your finger on the pulse of what's current in society. See what your costumes are. Well, you've got time to come up with a costume.
I know.
Might I suggest an alien from Area 51?
Woo! Or Wolverine!
After a discussion, I decided to investigate the mystery of the Thompson Park Vortex a bit further. As it happens, the Vortex is one of Thompson Park's biggest phenomenons.
For decades, Watertown neighbors have passed along legends of a mysterious spot near the golf course in Thompson Park that caused people to briefly disappear or be teleported. A woman who's known in Watertown as Dea has been studying the mystery spot since the 1970s. She believes it is a portal between different realities.
Time and space within the two realities, and in a way between the two realities, is very different.
I knew I had to dig deeper. Luckily, I knew a guy who knew a thing or two about the paranormal.
I don't really think that this is a vortex here. From what I've heard, it's more of a portal, really. Portal would be something where if somebody steps into it, it may transport them someplace different in time or different in location. I would like to believe that there is a portal here in Thompson Park just for the kind of fun of it. I don't know that there is, though. I don't know that I can believe it. We kind of come from a skeptical standpoint, and I really think that a lot of the accounts are kind of shoddy from what you see. It's anonymous people on the internet talking about an experience they had or something that happened so many years ago that you can't verify it.
In your opinion, do you think it's safe to explore the vortex?
I think it's absolutely safe to investigate the vortex. If you really want to walk around and try to get sucked into a vortex, go ahead.
We decided to test that theory and took a walk down the trail.
I think that I walked down the trail around when the sign went up and there was the dedication. Mayor Graham was the mayor at the time. He kind of put the dedication together, and there was another council member that was dressed up as an alien. And I want to say it was right over here. The alien came out and greeted the children. There were t-shirts that were given out. There were cupcakes that resembled the alien that's on the sign. And actually Gail Steele was here telling her stories of moving the vortex.
Looking around as we are right now, do you get the sense that there's a vortex here?
I don't get any sense of that, no. I think it's a fun urban myth that we have here in the city. And I just think it's a wooded area, a protected area here in our city. I have a feeling, I mean, I'm 34 and I know that pretty much my entire life I've been hearing this story. So, you know, I would say at least half a century. One of the stories that I saw on Reddit that kind of stuck out to me was that these two college students were, and the one was not from here, didn't mention if the other one was, but she had heard about the vortex, was very interested in it, wanted to experience it. So they snuck into the park around like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. Found the area where the vortex supposedly was. They went in, and then the trees, as they made it deeper and deeper in, the trees began having knots, and the knots began resembling faces. And then they said it felt squishy on their feet, which turned out to be night crawlers that they were stepping over. When they finally made it out, they thought they'd been in there for maybe an hour and 45 minutes or so. They'd actually been there for about 6 hours. It was 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, this definitely has like creepy vibes through here, like
Sure.
with all the roots sticking out
Sure.
from trees and the vines blocking out the sunlight.
Sure.
I guess I could see how people could get spooky vibes through here.
Absolutely.
With another walkthrough completed, I now had more questions than I did answers. Who better to ask than former Mayor Jeffrey Graham, who helped put the vortex on the map? You were the mayor who had erected the Watertown's Area 51 sign out in Thompson Park, also known as the Vortex.
Sure, the Vortex was sort of the consummate urban legend, I mean, involving the park, and many people, including a former resident, Gail Steele, they perpetuated the story of people disappearing and reappearing in different parts of the park. And around 2013-14, a news story developed about former Watertown resident Alan Dulles. And he was, of course, CIA director back in the 50s when Area 51 out in Nevada was set up. He called Area 51 Watertown as a code name. So I read that article and I said, well, we got this sort of vortexy thing up there and people are disappearing and sort of associated with aliens. It was just sort of a commemoration of the Dulles family, Area 51, the Thompson Park, the myth of the vortex, all wrapped into one sign.
How far back does this legend go of a vortex?
Well, that I don't know. Obviously, Thompson Park was the early part of the 1900s, but I think it's something that, developed just over time. I have no idea how it started. I suspect some of the people who talked about it a lot, like Gail Steele, they probably took the secret to their grave or something, because I don't know how it started, but it did, and it's always been something talked about, and somehow, in the internet age, it gets mentioned on, Facebook or something like that, or you Google it and that comes up, and of course that perpetuates it, because there are people interested in the paranormal.
So when you were a kid, did they tell stories of the vortex back then? Like, what got all this going?
No, it was something I heard about more when I was an adult, and that was the era when Mrs. Steele was in the news sort of as the local witch.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were news stories about her, and I moved here when I was 13, so that would have been as a young adult, you'd hear things like that. And it just sort of continued on, and you'd hear this and this here and that there. And, where exactly the vortex is in the park is subject to some debate.
Mm-hmm. I, for one, was absolutely impressed with the fact that you put that sign up, because I think that telling local legends and folklore is so important to the history and the culture of Watertown. But did you face any criticism for doing that?
No, I don't think so at the time. I think people just either thought nothing of it or thought it was an okay thing to do. I agree. I think it's great to commemorate history. Thompson Park has a boatload of history. When you look at the park itself, its genesis, the golf course, the zoo, the pools, everything that's up there has a story behind it.
Would you encourage other municipalities to commemorate their local legends?
Well, I would. I mean, you've got areas like Gouverneur with the lifesaver deal, and they put that giant lifesaver in the middle of their town. I always call Mayor McDougal the lifesaver mayor up there because, I remember that kind of stuff. I think all cities have some kind of folklore and so on that should be commemorated, and this is certainly part of ours. I think as Thompson Park ages and more things come out, I think we should continue to celebrate the park. I know there's been a lot of improvements lately, things that have been done there, even clearing out all that brush up there and everything. And there's a story behind all of it. And now that you can see more of the park with a lot of the brush gone, I think it's it's important. I enjoy, I'm not a picnicker or anything at my age, but, sometimes you just like to drive through it and look around and see what's going on and that kind of stuff. No people disappearing now, unfortunately.
Our discussion illuminated some of the Vortex's history, but I still had some questions. Thankfully, I could turn to Phil and Kate Crichton, founders of the Shadow Chasers, hoping to shed some light on this matter.
So the Shadow Chasers back in 2006 had investigated the alleged vortex located in Thompson Park. Can you give us a little bit of background information, what you found, and what instruments you used to go about collecting evidence?
Sure. So the reason why we wanted to investigate there is first of all, I mean, it just sounds really cool, like a vortex where people are like transported through time. And like that just sounds really interesting. And it's also a very interesting place to investigate because a lot of what we do is kind of complicated by the fact that there's so much electricity around us. So when you get the opportunity to investigate somewhere that's outside, it kind of is freeing in a way because you know that there's not going to be a lot of interference. So that kind of gave us a chance to really spread out and really kind of get a good feel for what's going on. Really, we're very interested in the concept of folklore. And, throughout time, you see a lot of experiences where people encounter like traveling through time, experiences of not even just like finding themselves in a different place in time, but like losing time, blacking out, waking up hours later. So that just seemed like a very interesting combination of our interests.
We used a variety of different things, including a DC magnetometer, which is an EMF reader, electrostatic monitors. We used a bunch of analysis equipment, including RF meters and RF monitors. When we're looking at stuff, one of the big things that come across is it's like everybody had been telling stories about, oh, you're seeing different windows of time, seeing different things. And my perspective was like, okay, we're going here. We've got a bunch of gear. We're monitoring for all of these different energy fields and how things are sweeping through. And when we get out there, what we found was a bunch of RF banding. During the daylight hours, it was kind of strong, but not terribly strong because, as you know, the geomagnetosphere of the Earth is actually expands and everything becomes stronger at night because there's less solar radiation compressing everything.
Which is why we investigate at night.
Bingo. So when we're doing this, we came across the RF banding, and it was really, really high. And so then we're trying out EM changes. The magnetometer didn't really show too much on changes from EM, but there were some changes in static, and it was also in the banding pattern. So you had this like grid-like pattern that was going across the entirety of like Thompson Park. And that pretty much led to a good analysis of what we could figure out from that. There's these huge RF bands, and when you looked at them, they line up with a lot of the transmission towers, both with Fort Drum and with the Watertown with their radio towers. And Thompson Park is right through the middle of it.
I cannot seem to figure out how these stories started. They seem to go back as far back as the park. Like even when I talk to elderly people, they're like, oh yeah, we heard those stories for years, even when I was a kid. So obviously there was a time before all those power lines got put up and the radio stations. Like, how do you explain why all this high EMF readings, like radiation, how does that explain how these stories persisted even way back when?
Well, I think too, there are also, there are also just places on the earth where like the geomagnetosphere is just weird. Like you kind of hear about like these places like mystery spots where, you know, it's like gravity's upside down or whatever. I mean, a lot of those are just kind of like cheap roadside attractions, but a lot of them do have some kind of like just weird, I don't want to say energy because that sounds a little bit too like
New agey
than what I'm saying, but just like the Earth's geomagnetosphere, for whatever reason, just isn't quite the same as it is anywhere else. And it just kind of makes you off kilter, you know? And like those are things that can occur naturally without the use of modern electronics.
Couldn't one argue that the evidence that you collected proving that there isn't a vortex at Thompson Park also be used to prove that there is, and the fact that you had such high readings would indicate that there is in fact some sort of another dimension there?
See, now that's the fun part with us, is we're not coming out definitively saying that it is or isn't because we're being objective about this. We're simply stating this is the evidence that is there. This is clearly an anomaly of sorts. You could argue one way or another.
I want to know your personal opinions. Do vortex exist? And is there one located in Thompson Park?
Electromagnetic vortexes can exist. They are traditionally kind of like electromagnetic dead spots, which is where you'll like lose cell phone reception, you'll get all kinds of stuff. And they do exactly what I was saying before. They can scramble your brain pretty well, too. Most people will walk away with a significant headache, but some people will be more susceptible, and they may end up being stuck in a hypnopompic state for a while.
As much as it pains me to say, I would have to agree with Phil. I really wish that there was a vortex. That sounds like a lot of fun. I'd like to go into a vortex and travel through time. I think that would be really cool. I think that it is something scientific. I think that it's something electromagnetic. And I think that when people have reported in like traveling through time, it seems like based on the stories that I've heard, it seems like a lot of it's something that they were in a suggestible state. Like it wasn't like they ended up in a time period where they're like, I don't know where I am. I don't know what this is about. They were always like kind of familiar, you know, it was sort of something that their brain could have supplied to them.
From its history to its vortex, Thompson Park's legacy spans just over 100 years. And with the help from the Watertown community, its legacy will continue for 100 more.
Make sure the sign stays up there. I hopefully reinstitute some kind of Halloween time of year celebration or something for kids.
The history is interesting, but I don't think that's the most important part. It's get out and use the park and then enjoy it. And you know, right now we're trying to make improvements by, unfortunately, a lot of areas have been neglected and they've been overrun with invasive species, buckthorn, the worst one, followed by honeysuckle and oriental bittersweet. And we've got garlic mustard and swallowwort. We got just, you name an invasive plant species and we've got it. I think the history is interesting, but I think it's much more important to get out today and spend some time outdoors and walk around and enjoy it.
So take a hike, enjoy the sights, admire the stonework. You never know what you might find.
Or where you might end up. Excuse me, can you tell me what year it is? Until next time, I'm your host, Christine Darrow.